Alabama West Florida is a annual conference in the United Methodist Church that I've actually covered a bit before. Their Bishop David Graves was known as a straight-shooting conservative that was very fair until disaffiliation season began, and then his words didn't seem to match up with what happened. He said several times, a couple times on camera, that any church, he was going to help churches get to where they need to go, and that any churches that wanted to leave, he wasn't going to stand in their way. And he and other conference officials urged people just to wait for the general conference that just happened last month or a month and a half ago. And then after that, they would help them get where they need to go. But the conference didn't allow for 2553 to be renewed or any kind of new disaffiliation provision to be passed. So now individual annual conferences can still ostensibly use paragraph 2549, which is closing the church and selling it back to, well, you don't have to sell it back, but annual conferences like, say, South Carolina have been using it that way. West Virginia did use it that way. They're not going to anymore. So hypothetically, Alabama, West Florida could make good on their promises and utilize paragraph 2549 to allow any additional churches that want to leave. But they've known for some time that the conference board of trustees is not a fan of this. Whether or not Graves is a question. It doesn't really matter. He's not going to stand against the board of trustees. This is not a conscience issue for him. This is not an integrity issue for him. He's made that clear. So I haven't been impressed with Graves for that reason. Also, if you saw how he presided over General Conference, it was abominable. Very hostile, very defensive. So there have been 48 churches, and what I'll show you now is this article that was posted. Let's see, I forget what this outlet is. It's probably on the page somewhere. But this was published at the end of last month. Alabama Supreme Court upholds the dismissal of UMC disaffiliation lawsuit brought by 48 Methodist churches. So this was not welcome news. Sorry, I need to make this a little bit bigger. So what happened here was that there were 48 United Methodist churches that brought a suit against the UMC. It was dismissed by a lower court. They appealed it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court also said, look, let's look at this quote. Although I sympathize, this is one of the justices, although I sympathize with the fairness concerns raised by the churches, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and our existing case law leave this court with no choice but to deny their request for relief. Instead, the only remedy for the conduct alleged by the churches in this case must come from the members of the Judicial Council, which is the UMC's ecclesiastical tribunal, guided by their faith consciences and the principles of biblical justice. So what this made clear is that the Alabama Supreme Court is not going to intervene. It does note at the bottom here that there is another case by Dothan's Harvest Church that is still being litigated, and I've covered that. That actually looks quite promising for a few different reasons. So we're waiting to see it. The Supreme Court said that they were not going to intervene in a lower court's ruling there either, and that was good in that case because now they have to not just the annual conference, but GCFA has to answer to the complaints brought by Harvest Church Dothan. So hopefully I'll be reporting on that regularly. So here's the thing. There's been developments. They had their annual conference last week, and I had a number of people reach out and say, hey, man, you got to talk about this. So here's the article that got published, let's see, on the 18th, 2 days ago. Let Us Leave, United Methodist Church is still blocked from disaffiliating in the Alabama West Florida Conference. This was written by Greg Garrison. I don't know him. But he apparently was able to tune into the annual conference or be there in person. I don't know. He says, delegates from the United Methodist churches that voted to leave the denomination but have been blocked from disaffiliating spoke up on frustration on Tuesday at the annual meeting of the Alabama West Florida Conference of the United Methodist Church. So something that I, in my summary, should have noted was I was actually covering the annual conference this annual conference whenever they had a round of disaffiliations. They did allow disaffiliations for a time under 2553, but a lot more churches left than they planned on. And as I recall, it was half, little under half, maybe a little over half. It was huge, and it rocked them, and they came to understand even more wanted to go. So after they had a huge exodus out, the Conference Board of Trustees created a new disaffiliation policy that made it so that conservative churches could not leave. Didn't matter if they fit the stipulations of 2553 or not. They were not going to allow it anymore. And so I did a piece on that, talking about how unfair and unjust it was. And I stand by that because it's true. Whenever you have something on the books that is passed by a conciliar body, you have to honor it. Anyway, they've had a bunch of churches, I don't know how many, dozens, maybe over 100, wanting to disaffiliate still, and they were shut down at this annual conference. The article says a group of 44 churches that wanted to disaffiliate had sued the conference and appealed to the Alabama Supreme Court, which ruled it is a matter that must be decided by the church, not secular courts. So that's what we just talked about. Churches that want to disaffiliate but have been prevented from doing so got no satisfaction this week as the conference met at FUMC Montgomery. You're going to see on the video that I'm about to play, it's a beautiful room that they're meeting in. Chandeliers, lovely setting. So they had a great place to meet and get very disappointed. The conference, this article says, voted to ask the denomination's Judicial Council for a ruling on procedures for how churches may be allowed to leave in the future. No church judicial ruling is expected before October. So this was a 2-day conference. They live streamed it all. You can find the videos online. I believe it was the Monday afternoon session whenever they had a group motion on the floor of annual conference to ask for a ruling from the Judicial Council about whether or not paragraph 2549 can be used as a disaffiliation measure. So that's, we're not going to look at video from that discussion. Just know that had already taken place. Quote, "If I were to do everything you want me to do, only a few of you would be here," said Bishop David Graves, head of the Alabama-West Florida Conference of the UMC, in his State of the Conference address. I believe he offered that Tuesday morning. I haven't watched that yet, but if this is a direct quote, this sounds pretty bad. He's saying, if I were to actually let you go the way that you guys want to, there wouldn't hardly be anybody here. The inference being, as a bishop, I have to maintain this institution. If that means I have to hold you against your will, then so be it. I mean, that's the implication there. He says, "I'm tired of trying to talk people into staying in the UMC." Well, of course you are. It's so demoralizing. I mean, pretend you have a girlfriend who wants to break up with you, and you're going, no, I'm not going to let you go. Really, I'm a great person. You should want to be with me. And she's going, no, I really don't. Let me go. That's a situation that the UMC has been in for so long, and they're imagining that they can hold the whole thing together with a bunch of duct tape and glue, and it's just not going to happen. People aren't going to stay. He cautioned people out of leaving in anger. Quote, "When you leave something because you're angry, you find the next thing to be angry about," Graves said. Anger turns to hate. So really what he's saying here is, out of benevolence, I'm not going to let you leave because you're not in the right place spiritually, mentally, and I need to guard you against yourself. You see how paternalistic this is? No action on allowing churches to leave will be taken at least until the next meeting of the conference scheduled for June of next year, Bishop Graves said. Quote, "This is going to be thrown out until another meeting or another time, and I do feel that that's inappropriate," said Andy Wendland, a delegate from Church Street UMC in Selma. Some churches that were considering leaving were urged to stay in the denomination until this year's UMC General Conference, which concluded May 3rd. Quote, "We were encouraged to remain, and we did," Wendland said. "This is not giving us the opportunity to exit, and that's really all we're asking for," he said. "We're just asking to let us leave if we would like to. The Board of Trustees has the authority to probably allow us to do this. They have not shown the will to do that," end quote. Bishop Graves ruled any petitions regarding disaffiliation to be out of order until a judicial court ruling. Quote, "These motions today and yesterday feel like and look like an attempt to squash this effort," Wendland said. So there's a little bit more to this article, and of course I've got the URL in the show notes so you can read it for yourself. But I was really interested in this exchange between Wendland and the bishop, and I looked it up. It was on Tuesday morning, and I thought we would watch some highlights from this back and forth because, as I said on Monday, they made the decision to refer the question to the Judicial Council about whether or not 2549 can be used to allow churches to disaffiliate. Now, they could go ahead and let churches go. It's the annual conference that holds the deeds, not the deeds really, holds the trust of these churches. And if they saw it as their prerogative, which it is, to go ahead and have a disaffiliation provision like South Carolina, and there have been a few others, Holston has got one, then they could go ahead and let churches disaffiliate even as they refer this question to the Judicial Council. If the Judicial Council ruled against it, well, then hypothetically, hopefully, they will have already dismissed these churches. They could have a special called annual conference and get all this process so that it can't be undone, and then the Judicial Council could give its ruling, and they could have at least helped some other churches get to where they needed to go. They have that ability. They chose not to use it. So here is, I honestly don't know who this person is. They probably said her name, but she's reporting on the decision. There were a bunch of resolutions that were submitted to let the churches go or have a disaffiliation plan to some effect, and she's going to explain what they did.
So you received resolutions on the floor yesterday, and they all pertain to the same subject. So the committee would like to bundle them together and vote on them as one because our response is the same to all of them. Okay. We recommend non-concurrence because we believe these resolutions are out of order. It requests the annual conference to establish an exit path for reasons of conscience related to issues of human sexuality, similar to paragraph 2553. However, the provisions of paragraph 2553 expired on December 31st, 2023, and the legislation explicitly stated it shall not be used after that date. The annual conference lacks the authority to create exit paths for local churches, as this would unlawfully usurp the role of the General Conference.
Okay. So you're ruling non-concurrence and ruling them they're not in order.
Yes.
I agree they're not in order at this time. For several reasons. One, any petition you put in with 2553, it just automatically puts it out because 2553 is expired. We're working with 2549. We have asked for a declaratory decision. We're asking for a second declaratory decision, maybe, depends on what your vote is. And so we're going to have to get that clarified. That's going to be very, very important before we can move forward. Also, the delegation removed their resolution, and I meant to say this yesterday. I appreciate them removing their resolution because, and I appreciate them putting it together, and I appreciate how they're going to educate us over the next year. But it would have been very hard to vote on something when we really don't know what exactly we're voting on in terms of regionalization. So I just appreciate the collaborative work around that.
So he's not being disingenuous yet, but they are making the decision. They're not going to allow churches to move forward. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit because this guy gives a really decent question.
You might be familiar with South Georgia Conference, and South Georgia Conference is not having these questions about 2914 or 2553 and has found a way for churches to exit from the United Methodist Church. What's different about our conference?
Okay.
So why can South Georgia do this and not us?
Thank you for asking. I am the bishop of the South Georgia Conference. In 2021, the annual conference with the work of the Board of Trustees there passed a policy that 2549 could be utilized, point 3, after General Conference. And the trustees have stayed steady with that. The annual conferences stayed steady with that. And I honor the work of the annual conference and the Board of Trustees. We'll have a called session there in August. And the district superintendents are working with churches. This is a different annual conference. The body of this annual conference thinks differently. The trustees think differently. And as the bishop, I have to honor the process of each annual conference and the Board of Trustees. So
what he said there, he said essentially, I'm the bishop, I do what I want. Every conference is different. We have a different Board of Trustees. They feel differently about this. I'm going to stand by them. That's pretty much what he said. There is nothing different about South Georgia than Alabama, West Florida. There is no reason that they can do this and Alabama, West Florida can't, other than the people in charge just don't want to. That's really what it comes down to here. There was some obfuscation there. There were some measures made in South Georgia that weren't made in Alabama, West Florida. Fine. But the bishop can do what he wants here. And that's true. And he's making clear, I don't want to. So here's Andy Wendland. He's the one quoted in the article here.
Andy Wendland from Church Street United Methodist Church in Selma submitted the resolution that was not through a church council. And that resolution was for any church, not specifically our church, because so many of us feel like we've been left out of this process. Mm-hmm. I guess my question is, this is going to be thrown out until another meeting or another time, and I do feel that that's inappropriate, and this resolution was an attempt to follow through on the assurances that were given us in prior conferences, and we were encouraged to remain, and we did, and we feel like this has not given us the opportunity to exit, and that's really all we're asking for, and we're just asking to let us leave if we would like to. I think the Board of Trustees has the authority to probably allow us to do this. They have not shown the will to do that, and these motions today and yesterday look like a veiled attempt to squash this effort.
Just keep with your question, Andy. What's your specific
I know.
question?
I guess I'm asking. This will not come up again until next year.
Probably, that's correct.
And that seems wrong. And I've communicated with you personally and also the conference board to no avail. And
yep.
I appreciate the responses, certainly.
Yep. Okay.
He seems trying to be nice.
Thank you.
It doesn't seem like a very fair outcome.
Okay, thank you. Just a brief response to that. This annual conference yesterday approved a declaratory decision by a wide majority, and we have got to see what the Judicial Council does before we move forward. Also,
so that argument right there, okay, so you guys voted to send this to the Judicial Council. So it seems irresponsible, that inference being, it seems irresponsible to go ahead and make a decision without waiting on the Judicial Council. So this is one of those things where it was a decision made collaboratively in good faith. Let's try and make sure all this is by the book. But then it's used against the will of local churches that voted in that. You know, they wanted to do everything above ground, but then if they had understood when they made that vote that it would be used to hold them back, they would not have voted that way.
To kind of answer your question, I have a Judicial Council ruling that was pretty severe against me in 2022 around doing any process ad interim about allowing churches to leave. So we've got to wait to a session, either a called session or a...
So he says there, I've already gotten in trouble for trying to help you guys. I'm not going to get in trouble anymore, which you want to be sympathetic, but it's, you know, when you look at the spiritual role of a bishop, if something is clearly wrong, like coercively retaining local churches against their will in an organization that they now think is ungodly, then, I mean, what are they going to do to him if he lets them go? I mean, nothing. If anything, he has to take early retirement. Look at him. The guy's close to retirement anyway. Why not leave doing the right thing? It's so silly to me that there are some people who think that this is a legitimate way of thinking through it. Here's a final guy.
I'm really disappointed. The question
Yeah,
you
just
answered,
state your question.
Andy just asked basically the same question. There's not going to be a way provided for a church to leave until the declaratory statement from the Judiciary Committee.
That would be my recommendation.
And I just wanted, my church sent me here We have voted to leave. We voted to leave much earlier.
Okay.
And were denied. And I'm just very disappointed that this conference cannot address this in a more timely manner. We have now become a church.
I want to thank you for that, because you asked a question. So you asked the question.
Yes,
We've heard
well,
it,
you answered the question through Andy.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
He's just letting himself be heard. You know, and it would be it's infuriating how many times there have been in many annual conferences, including my own former annual conference, Oklahoma, where you have the entire assembled body of voting delegates, and you're told, actually, you guys can't decide the thing that you want to today, which flies in the face of conciliar rule. And that's the situation that they're now in. There are probably a majority of churches there that want there to be a disaffiliation provision, but Graves and the conference leadership are not letting it come to that. They've used procedure to put that off. And then the question is, this is just going to keep coming up before us, isn't it? And Bishop Graves is saying, yeah, probably. But, you can just kick the can indefinitely, and there can be new procedural things that, I think the long-term strategy, and I've said this before, I think the long-term strategy is for the United Methodist Church to retain buildings and assets to liquidate so that they can focus on a massive church planting, church growth effort in cities across the U.S. that have largely bought into modern gender theory. I don't think it's going to work, but I mean, it's a gambit that they're running. And right now, they're trying to just maintain public face so that they can demoralize these local churches where people just walk out. So I've said it a lot lately. I think the role of these local churches that are trapped now is to walk away with their buildings and assets and leave the United Methodist Church, put the United Methodist Church in the position of suing them to stay. This is what's happened in the Rio, Texas annual conference, and the Supreme Court there made a decision in favor of the churches, saying, hey, this is an ecclesiastical matter. We're not going to get involved here. So even if Texas is an exceptional case, and even if these churches lose, it's better to spend this money fighting injustice than it is just to hand over to the unjust entity. Also, I just think don't file suit first, even if they aren't believers anymore. It's just better to be peaceable, to walk away, to insist, hey, this is a line too far. We can't go this way. So if I know there are probably several hundred local churches looking at what can we do now. It is your prerogative to vote with your feet at any point and just walk away. But if you want to try and fight for something, I don't think it makes Christians look bad when we fight. I think it shows that we have something worth fighting for. And carrying forward the legacies of those who built our churches is something I think worth fighting for. Not being nasty about, not being hateful about, but contending for. And so, if anything, just pray for these folks that are caught up against their will, and they're speaking what sounds like very basic truth to people who just don't seem to have the discernment or ability to listen anymore, and that's really frustrating. I'm sure Bishop Graves and everybody on his staff are perfectly lovely people. I'm sure that they would be great relatives and friends, but something has happened where the consciences of people in United Methodist leadership have largely been seared, and it's very disconcerting to watch. It was disconcerting on the inside. Now that I'm on the outside, it's still upsetting to watch just the relational brokenness and the lack of self-awareness. And so hopefully that helps us know how to pray for them a bit better. I've covered Alabama, West Florida a good deal. So if y'all know of other conferences where this kind of coverage can be done, I am not done covering the United Methodist Church. There will probably be a day where I am, but for right now, their agenda is to look good while they squash churches, and I see it as my agenda to shine a light on that. So appreciate you being a part of it.